In 1665, social distancing orders emptied campuses throughout England as the bubonic plague raged, killing roughly 1/4 of London's population in a mere 18 months. A 24-year-old student from Trinity College of Cambridge was among those forced to leave campus and return indefinitely to his family's farm in the English countryside to shelter in place. Reflecting on his experiences during that time, Sir Isaac Newton wrote extensively about his choices to question the operating assumptions that governed the physical world, to see himself less as a student in university and more as a student of the universe. As a result, it was in that place at that time that he would change the trajectory of our human understanding of the world, and his discoveries in calculus, motion, optics, and gravitation led the way. This time at his home during the epidemic came to be known as his Annus Mirabilis, his year of wonders. I wonder, how have you used your time over these last 6 months? One doesn't dare compare mastering Zoom with discovering the inner workings of the universe, although sometimes it does feel like an equivalent feat, but nevertheless, we are not all that different from Newton in that we find ourselves amidst a time of chaos and challenge, faced with many of the same questions that we imagine he faced too. How have we used the time we've been given? How will we use it in the future? Who have we been? Who will we choose to be? Consider for a moment the foundational physics of centripetal and centrifugal force. Newton coined these terms to describe the tendencies of force to cause an object either to seek the center of a system or to flee from it. Centripetal literally means center seeking and describes the force that keeps an object moving in a curved path directed in toward the center. This is the force that keeps us from flying off of the earth as it spins. It's literally what holds everything together. Centrifugal force, on the other hand, is the force that appears to push things away from the center. For example, when holding a rock attached to a string and swinging it in a circle, centrifugal force is at play should one let go of the string. The rock won't continue to spin in a circular path. It will instead launch outward in a straight line. If the Earth's gravitational pull were to suddenly cease, at that moment, the moon would lose its orbit and simply travel away. Both of these forces are operative in physical existence, but tonight, as the new year begins, I'd like to suggest that they are foundational in our societal existence as well, and invite us to consider the profound insight they offer for how each of us might choose to move forward into 5781. In their simplest forms, societies are made up of 3 primary elements: a market or economy that deals with the distribution of wealth, a state or body politic that navigates the distribution of power, and then a moral code, what we might call the common good. Now, the market and the state can be governed either by outward or inward pulls, depending on the nature of the particular society, but for any society to function in a healthy way, its moral system must be centripetal, because morality is the force that limits and directs our pursuit of private gain. It is the voice that says no to the individual me for the sake of the collective us. Consider that before Adam Smith, the founding father of capitalism, wrote The Wealth of Nations, he wrote The Theory of Moral Sentiments, in which he affirmed this very same idea. There are evidently some principles in human nature which interest a person in the fortune of others and render their happiness necessary to them, though the person derives nothing from it. Of this kind, too, is pity or compassion, that we often derive sorrow from the sorrow of others as a matter of fact too obvious to require any instances to prove it. Or more simply, there's just something in our nature that impels us to transcend self-interest and instead direct ourselves toward each other. Judaism sources this notion back to the very beginning of humanity. Remember when God created Ha'adam, the first human? God determined rather quickly, Lo tov ha'adam heyot levado. It's not good for a person to be alone. The solution? The creation of an ezer kenegdo, a fitting partner, or put literally, a helper opposite of him. Our foundational blueprint for humanity roots itself both in the centripetal idea of the importance of transcending aloneness, as well as in the importance of a shared, diverse, collaborative existence. But today we find ourselves far from Eden's orbit, with our focus shifted away from the collective toward an entirely different field instead, the field of self. Rabbi Jonathan Sacks explains it this way in his new masterwork called Morality. The revolutionary shift from we to I means that everything that once consecrated the moral bonds binding us to one another, faith, creed, custom, convention, no longer does so, leaving us in an individualistic universe that may be free, but it is fraught with loneliness, isolation, and vulnerability, and a prevailing sense of ultimate meaninglessness. That's the price of radical individualism. Everything has become immediate, transactional, and presentational. And the result is that we find ourselves being pulled centrifugally away from each other faster than ever before. This shift from centripetal connectivity to centrifugal dispersion is, in my view, the greatest threat to our relationships, our communities, our country, and our world, no less to the well-beings of our individual souls. On this matter, I know that for so many of you, no matter what side you sit on, you believe that what happens on November 3rd will determine our collective trajectory. Although it will undoubtedly be an important day, I would like to suggest that we direct our moral energies instead toward November 4th. No matter how wonderful or terrible you believe either candidate to be, and no matter who is elected to reside in that White House, please hear me. That force cannot and will not erase nor bridge the toxic divisions that continue to plague our society. Remember, a market, a body politic, and a common good. We have agency in the market by our spending and saving. We have agency in the state by our support of candidates and voting. But our agency in a moral code is demonstrative solely through the choices of how we act in relation to others. The market and the state, they do not know us. They do not feel. They have no moral sensibility in and of themselves. But too many of us have ceded our moral agency over to the market and to the state, investing all of our energies in the creation of a state that we believe should care about us. But in the process, we've abandoned our own responsibilities to each other. The state can never replace community and relationships, but we've confused this. We've outsourced our value of mutual care to the state and prioritized instead autonomy, the right to live as we choose, in our personal relationships. We've sanctioned the centrifugal shift. Of note is that while America may give us rights, Judaism has no such equivalent concept. In the Jewish framework, what we have is responsibility to ourselves, to each other, to the world, and to God. This is, according to our tradition, what keeps the world rotating on its axis in its orbit, as it should. I'm not suggesting that we shouldn't have opinions, passionate ones, or that we shouldn't advocate for and support efforts for those matters about which we care. It is our right to stand up for what we believe in. But it remains our responsibility not to permit our own narratives and viewpoints to erode the way we see and understand others who do not see things the same way, and in the process rupture relationships and sever our ties. We must remember all violence begins in disconnect. Ultimately, with the disintegration of relationships where people are left on one side or another, each side perceiving the other one as morally anathema, violence increases. And what always follows, if we listen to history, is war. That is what is at stake, and what many believe is already happening. Consider for a moment the function of identity politics, or how it can be used to unite or divide society. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. used identity politics centripetally describing segregation and injustice as a destructive force, appealing to our universal principles and our common humanity as the ways to heal prejudice and unite the nation. On how King used identity for politics for the good, sociologist Jonathan Haidt shared that MLK appealed to common religious principles, the creed of our founding fathers, and a common language of love to drive away prejudice. King framed our greatest moral failing as an opportunity for centripetal redemption, reminding us that the group to which we all should most identify is our human family, while at the same time not losing sight of the importance and beauty of our own uniqueness. This is identity politics used for the good. It aligns with our Jewish understanding of identity as well, one in which being a Jew is part of what makes us who we are. But ultimately, the quality of goodness is elevated above all else. Rabbi David Wolpe puts it this way: the line between good and evil does not run between countries, peoples, or tribes. It runs through every human decision in every human heart. A human being is never a type or a group, but a unique image of God. But today's identity politics is different. Instead of centripetally drawing us toward our common humanity, it centrifugally pushes us away from anyone not perceived as within or aligned with our particular group. Today's identity politics creates an impossible quagmire with the hard rules of, I demand that you understand me, and at the very same time, I forbid you to understand me. This provides just the right toxic recipe for a poison that brews nothing but centrifugal disconnect. Of note is that in Judaism, we have always understood the value of maintaining the connection between the perceived us and them. 2,000 years ago, our rabbis established a series of guidelines that they categorized as mipnei darchei shalom, actions done for the sake of the ways of peace. In one such example, a Jewish person observing the laws of Shemitah, these forbade them from harvesting or processing crops in a particular year, was still allowed to lend another Jewish person an item to do just that, even though they'd be breaking the law. And what if the other person was a non-Jew and not bound by Torah law at all? The Mishnah teaches that the Jew not only is forbidden from judging them or suggesting that they consider changing their ways, but is also instructed to wish them well. And note, the non-Jew in that case was most likely Roman, from the same nation responsible for destroying our temple. Make no mistake, society messaged the very same us-them narrative all the way back then, but our rabbis didn't fall for the centrifugal pull. They doubled down on firming up the center. Isn't this an incredible framework through which we can understand how to reweave the web of connection across lines of difference? We see here that while our religious life or belief system is by rights ours, that fact doesn't entitle us to stand in judgment of others who may not or do not operate in that same system. This is what it means to orient oneself for the sake of the ways of peace, which means maintaining our connections and relationship with each other. Unless we assume that this sort of collaborative framework held true only for matters of religious observance, the Gemara, which comes a few hundred years later in a more urban context, ups the ante on how we might orient ourselves centripetally toward each other, when it states that we Jews are obligated to feed the hungry, Jew and non-Jew alike, to care for the ill, Jew and non-Jew alike, all for the sake of the ways of peace. The Jewish ideal is never a you're either with me or against me stance, but rather one grounded in genuine care for all others. I want to share with you one more key difference between centripetal and centrifugal force. Centripetal force is understood as a real force, meaning that because its pull is toward the center, it is consistent across all perspectives and viewpoints. Centrifugal force, on the other hand, is referred to as an apparent or fictitious force because it's experienced subjectively based on a particular frame of reference. It's relative, not fixed or permanent. So it turns out the key to reestablishing centripetal pull lies within the reestablishment of a common center. A common center, the thread that runs through us all, our shared humanity. Not the dangerous, reductive thought that our entire identity is our political party, our gender, our race, our sexual identity, our zip code, what have you. When it comes to our human relationships, we need to remember that trying to convince one another to change our viewpoint based on our own viewpoint just doesn't work. All it will do is push us farther away from each other. It's a centrifugal tactic. But we can strive to open each other's hearts. We can build relationships intentionally with people who are not like us, who see the world differently from us. And then we can strive to create a culture of shared understanding, not necessarily agreement, and at a minimum, respect for seeing how the other might see the world. Remember, long before learning from those with whom we disagree was seen as betrayal, it was understood as a noble virtue. It is in this space of both shared values and feeling valued that our hearts begin to open and things begin to change. The center can indeed be reestablished. This night, we stand at a powerful flex point in time where the axes of the Jewish New Year and the secular New Year meet. Sure, we can call for the cancellation of 2020. There's certainly enough cause and despair to merit such a force. But so too can we decide to shift our perspective, to envision what is yet to come not as already lost, but rather as a time filled with possibilities for healing and return, waiting only for us to reveal them. And to make that choice, we can begin by reorienting ourselves around a center of hope, hope for all that can yet be possible. That however vast the perceived divide between us, it is not yet too late to extend our hands toward one another. Here's something pretty amazing about hope. Hope comes from an Indo-European root, koi, the letters K-E-U, which is the same root from which the word curve comes. And it means a change in direction or going in a different way. And our Hebrew word for hope, you know this, tikva, comes from the root kaveh, kuf vav he, meaning to gather together. It references the act of combining a multiplicity of strands and coiling them around each other into a single, much stronger cable. Turns out hope is pretty centripetal in and of itself. In the epilogue of Morality, Rabbi Jonathan Sacks asks, what will be the shape of a post-COVID world? Will we use this unparalleled moment to reevaluate our priorities? Or will we strive to get back as quickly as possible to business as usual? Will we have changed or merely endured? Will the pandemic turn out to have been a transformation in history or merely an interruption of it? These are the questions. I pray that we will answer them together in one resounding voice that returns us to each other in what might yet be a most amazing year of wonders for us all. Shana Tova.